So I've been playing God Hand. Okay, fine. Jesus Christ, just leave me alone, man. Leave me alone! God Hand is a game about the world of games journalism absolutely and utterly shitting its pants. If you're unfamiliar, this game sat at the center of one of IGN's biggest fuck-ups, in which the person reviewing the game had absolutely no idea of how the goddamn thing even played, didn't care to invest the time to be able to change that, and wrote it off as a stinking piece of doo-doo. Just another one in the long line of Western gaming outlets not really knowing how to cover Japanese action games. In a world where God of War and Lollipop Chainsaw are just as good as Devil May Cry. Anyway, some would claim this to be the reason as to why God Hand so like shit. I, however, would beg the differ and say that it's because of this abhorrently disgusting box art. So, why was God Hand this misunderstood then? Well, having now played it, I can quite comfortably say that it is unconventional in every conceivable way. The story, for instance, is about a boy named Gene who's lost his arm trying to save a local cutie from a gang of flamboyant homosexuals. But, as luck would have it, said cutie came from some sort of secret clan who deal in holy body parts, and thus, Gene acquired the God Hand, with which he can finally take down the demons that plague this world for some reason. Cue the gay leather boy straight out of Fist of the No-Ken, and morbidly obese Guido Mexicano pimp stereotype villains with big dick cigars. And in terms of gameplay, it's basically a beat 'em up, only then with tank controls, a third-person over-the-shoulder camera, and the ability to custom make your own combos by way of a cheeky technique system. Oh, and shit also moves impossibly fast and is totally off of its fucking rocker at all times. How the game works is that each level is separated by various areas, and each area contains a set amount of enemies, pickups, melee weapons, and other miscellaneous shit like switches and event triggers. And of course, the objective is to beat up all of these enemies, get points, and then use those points to get stronger by upgrading your stats and getting new techniques to use in combos. All of which you'll most certainly fucking need as well, as this game is hard as fuck. Every enemy is a potential threat, every corner could house your death, and every boss is a test of thine ladhood, as this is fucking God Hand. Due to the stupidly high walking speed, tank controls, and the stubborn as fuck, actually a little bit of a problem camera, basic movement is a proper fucking bitch. However, the entire game and its control scheme are there to service the combat. This clicked with me when I noticed how walls pop in and out of existence rather than being in face. Nothing ever obstructs the action is what I'm trying to get at here. Even the environments are a bit bland and empty just for this very reason, and luckily the combat in question is also really fucking good. As stated, you're pretty much asked to make your own combos. The game applies to this in two very different ways. The first includes you assigning attacks to triangle and X, as well as various variations based on directional inputs. And the second, being the cheeky one, is the entire fucking mechanic revolving around square, implying that each sequential press can have a different move assigned to it, thus creating a vicious chain of shit. The abilities what you assign are what the game calls techniques, which you can find in chests or buy with points at stores accessible from menu in between areas. These techniques will have various attributes as well, like breaking someone's guard, knocking them over, or launching them up for a cheeky juggle, and also different speeds based on their animations and damage values. And as sensible game design would have it, all enemies function differently, so you need to figure out which techniques work best on which dudes and what combinations are best for the area in general. Like, you might notice a character often standing on one leg while spin kicking, thus making it a good plan to start your square chain with a floor sweep, and then follow it up with a ground pound of some kind. You really need to study your enemies and essentially
get adequate,
which you'll have ample time for as well, as you will die quite often. In terms of other abilities and stuff, Gene has the obligatory Devil Trigger Witch Mode generic beat 'em up special meter bar that fills up as you hit people in face, and once full, he's able to unleash the God Hand for a brief period and be practically invincible. Then there's also this shit the game calls Roulette, which uses these wee balls here that one acquires by picking up cards and is basically just another special move thing. And finally, but most importantly, dodging, which is done by flicking the right analog stick in whichever direction you wish to elegantly flop towards. These being your tools to keep oneself from getting fucked. I mean, Gene might talk the big talk, but he's actually a bit of a bitch dick, as his life bar is puny as fuck. One single hit ticks off about a quarter at first, and some bosses can easily half the bastard if you get careless. Now, you might be inclined to think that this is the game just being an asshole and that the stacks are weighed against you are too fucking much, but that's not really the case. You being able to adjust your combos to any situation and being able to swiftly dodge all over the place willy-nilly is more than enough to be able to get by. It just requires a lot of trial and error to get it right. Thankfully, the levels are pretty tiny, and shit's actually quite forgiving, all things considered. God Hand is really just a game about pretty basic pattern memorization. The places I died at most frequently, for instance, were at the beginning phases of new levels or just the first 2 goes at a boss fight, but usually nothing more than that, save for a few exceptions I'll get into later. Reason being is that each area has a few new enemies that all have their own strengths, weaknesses, and attacks, and of course bosses follow a similar pattern. So the first time around, I was still getting accustomed to those attributes, slowly picking up on how this dude revs up his attacks, or how these mohawk guys can't be floored, or how these whip bitches are easy to juggle, and so on. And once that clicked, it became very easy to then dodge and attack accordingly and mow my way through a stage easy peasy. Of course, I still died through getting overzealous or careless during a corpse run, as Gene JSP always remains quite low compared to the damage some of these fuckers dish out, plus all enemies have a random chance at reawakening as a proper demon ready to rip you a new one, but those are just things that help keep you on your toes. Which, when coupled with the ridiculously high speeds that God Hand plays at, makes for one engaging motherfucker. To accommodate for the trialing of the errors though, the levels you play in remain fairly small, and dying doesn't make you lose any points or items or reset any progress other than the 10 whole meters you possibly could have jogged before you got your shit fucked. And naturally, things also trivialize, making each subsequent run easier than the last. Nor is the game at all stingy with its placement of health pickups, and shops and saves are always readily available as well whilst moving in between areas. There is a little bit of constant risk and reward still, in that going around an optional corner in the hopes of finding a banana could just as well result in a free prostate exam executed rather clumsily with a meat cleaver. I was like equal amounts on edge, excited, and 100% invested at all times, simply because of how well the game balances its difficulty through treating the player fair and intelligently, and by how incredibly beefy and satisfying the mechanics, sound effects, and animation are. You really feel each and every punch you dish out, and I physically started pushing buttons harder than I would do normally to compensate. Seeing the points rack up, giant bits of fruit flying around, and smashing some dude to the other side of a stage after having successfully broke their guard is fucking godlike. It's almost akin to the meditative experiences one gets while playing a bullet hell game, or while nailing a high-speed run in a tough-as-nails platformer, or during an epic JRPG boss fucking that went on for what felt like hours, where my eyes fucking melted into the screen and the controller simply became an extension of my brain's impulses. I swear to Shinji Mikami's left bollock that this game's boss fights are among the most exhilarating things I've experienced in a video game, hands down. I'm not used to much, but these hands remain down, motherfucker. They quite cleverly put your ability to tactfully dodge to the test, as well as how smart you are in regards to knowing what types of techniques to use and in what order. I guess the technique system isn't so much about creating a combat style to suit your own needs, but more so about adapting to what the game throws at you, which goes doubly for the bosses. Like, some of them I beat no problem on my second or even first try, but with others, like this bitch, it took me about 30 fucking tries before I even understood what I had to do. The most surprising thing I took away from dying well into the double digits for some double digits though, was that I never felt powerless or as if I was up against unfair odds. Some, if not most, difficult games definitely go there for me, but with God Hand I quite quickly learned that what I was doing wasn't working and that I had to figure out something else.
Determination.
Okay, so of course there were also a few things I didn't like entirely. I will say this though, I obviously haven't mastered the game in any way, so some of these points might be born out of inexperience, but the FOV is fucking bupkis in my opinion.
Oh my god, dude, he's so tiny.
That was probably racist. If anything, it's more of a hindrance during exploration and downtime than it is during combat, so you could definitely argue if it's really even a hindrance at all, but I still felt it a bit annoying during the more hectic fights. Granted, enemies tend to be less aggressive when out of view, but with no way to lock on properly, to my knowledge at least, shit has a 40% chance of becoming a bit fuck. Like during this fight for instance, where they pit you up against 3 bosses previously fought separately all at the same fucking time. Keeping in mind all of their movesets and weaknesses while needing to dodge projectiles, whips, and charging fat men felt a bit too crazy given the contextual limitations and the speed the game runs at. If you ask me, the very few busy brawls like this cater more towards Godhand's otherwise excusable weaknesses and fail to embrace its strengths. Those strengths being tactful dodging in a fair, well-balanced fight instead of an all-out rumble where you can't tell heads from titties. But despite that, winning was still literal sex fuck, and I also felt like I learned more about how the game wanted me to play, so we still good. Well, ignoring the fact that I got by on a mere slither of health and that had I died during that crucial final victory moment, I certainly would have shoved my big stupid head right through a fucking door. Hello. Believe it or not, but I was actually a bit intimidated by Godhand beforehand. If I wasn't, I would have reviewed it ages ago. Thing is that it's largely heralded as one of the hardest games ever made. Which isn't really my type of ballpark, and it's also a very complex game which makes it tricky from a proper review standpoint. But, as I said, it's pretty good. Shit was still hard to review, but not because it was too difficult or too complicated, but because it was just so goddamn banging that I forgot to write down my thoughts while playing. Also, it's really not that hard, as it's actually pretty liberal with its checkpoints and more than fun enough to where it's easy to pull through even on those rare occasions where it does get frustrating. It even has a difficulty scaling mechanic that I barely even touched upon because, well, to be honest, it didn't really impact my first time basic bitch normal mode playthrough all that much. Supposedly, it raises its difficulty level based on how long you can dish out damage without receiving any. What I can say is that said level rising is quite the hype occasion, which does add to the combat kinesthetically. But yeah, Godhand is a really good fucking game-and-ass game. Maybe even sort of the best beat-em up there is, simply by virtue of it being such a combat-centric experience with nothing watering it down. Though there is a story, of course, which is completely drenched in action movie fuckboy cliches and corny horny characters with the best voice acting.
You've been a wonderful audience. Long live the guitar.